Hey, this is Manny with Not Waiting to Live. I'm a former Mercedes-Benz car salesman, and in this video, I'm going to compare the cost to own 6 popular vehicles across their lifespan. So most people understand that a used car is cheaper than a new car. But the reason I'm making this video is because that's not particularly useful advice, and it's not always right. So what I'm going to do is use actual data. So I'm going to look at the purchase price and the trade-in values of these vehicles over the course of many years and compare them so that you can better understand how the cost to own a vehicle changes over time as the vehicle ages and adds on more mileage. So you'll be able to see how the cost goes from when it's new to what that version would be like if you bought it when it was 3 years old, or what the cost would be like if you bought a 7-year-old version. And when I show you the table of comparisons at the end, you'll be able to see that one of these 6 vehicles actually is cheaper to purchase new than it would be to have purchased used. But before I get into those tables and dive into the numbers, I just want to give some quick context on affordability in general. Depending on which financial expert you ask, the advice will be largely the same. Unless you're a millionaire, don't buy a new car. And that's what Dave Ramsey says. And more specifically, his advice is that if the total cost of the cars in your household should not exceed 50% of your household income. And that is basically pushes most people out of the new car market for most intents and purposes. The old rule of thumb, which I think is still a good rule of thumb and I think more people should stick to, is the 24-10 rule, which is to say that you should always put 20% down, your payment should be 4 years or less, and your monthly payment should not exceed 10% of your income. I like to provide a more flexible definition of affordability, which is to say that you should at least pay off the car as fast as it depreciates. You should pay off the car as fast as it loses value so that you never owe more on the car than it's worth. And the reason I like that definition better than the others is because cars don't depreciate equally. Some lose value faster than others. It's not at the same rate. It's not for the same amount. Some cars even appreciate. But I cover more about car affordability in another video on my channel. I cover all things video negotiation on this channel. So if you want to save time or money on your next vehicle purchase, whether it's a new or used, check out this channel. As always, if you find this useful, helpful, please like the content, comment if you can. This is the way the YouTube algorithm picks up my content and gives me the incentive to keep making videos like this. So just briefly outline here what I'm going to show you. These scenarios, I'm looking at new cars over the period of 3 or 7 years. I'm looking at 3-year-old cars over the period of 7 to 11 years. 7 being the average amount of time that someone owns their vehicle nowadays. Then I'm also going to look on the other extreme. Someone were to buy a 7-year-old car, ride that out for 11 years. What would that look like? And the way I'm pricing $1 per mile is I'm looking at the trade-in value and I'm subtracting the purchase price. So the trade-in value here I'm getting from Kelley Blue Book. And what's interesting here, most people as a car salesman, I can tell you, most people are not happy with the trade-in value of their vehicle. And most new versus used discussions are left open-ended. They're never asked to account for, well, what did that vehicle end up selling for? What was the total cost over that whole span? So that's what I'm hoping to achieve here. I do think that the KBB values are relatively realistic. They're consistent and in the same ballpark as the paid resource that I use. So the reason I use Kelley Blue Book for this kind of comparison is just so that you can repeat these steps on your own and with just publicly available information. And the purchase price I'm using is not the list price, but the price that, based on my experience, I think that vehicle will actually go for. And I have the ability to access data to see what they do sell for. So I know that those are realistic as well. And I'm making the assumption that for all vehicles, all scenarios, 15,000 miles a year. That's just for comparison's sake. But I did exclude some major variables that I just want to comment on. I did leave out the premium add-ons, and that's just to make the comparisons simpler. If you put in, $20,000 of premium add-ons to your Honda Civic, well, those are going to depreciate much more rapidly than the car itself. I mean, they could lose 25 to 50% of its value within the first 3 years. I know at Mercedes, it was very common to see add-ons lose 75, 90% of their value in the first 3 to 5 years. So you're getting those extras for pennies on the dollar, which is great value as a buyer, but for comparison's sake, leaving it out. If you're a bargain shopper, you shouldn't be adding those on anyways, for the most part. Also want to comment on sales tax, left that out. It's so different by state. But one thing that is interesting to me, these financial experts that try to say, they try to give a blanket advice for auto purchasing seem to always overlook the fact that 43 of the states in the union have provide a trade-in difference credit for sales tax. So they only tax you on the remainder after you trade in your vehicle for new cars. So not for used cars, for new cars. So if you have a $30,000 car and you trade in and you buy it new and you trade in a $10,000 car to make that new purchase, they're not going to tax you sales tax on 30,000 in 43 of the states. They're going to tax you on 30 minus 10 equals 20,000. And that could potentially, depending on the situation, save you $1,000 or more dollars. And that's just a variable you need to account for when you're making your decision. Last comment on things I excluded: didn't include maintenance and repairs. Also didn't include gas mileage and stuff. We're looking at like vehicles in a column. So even though I'm comparing them side by side in the end, we're looking at the value of the versions of each car, and maintenance varies so much, not only by make and model, but by trim. Like I got a 94 Jeep Wrangler that I had to replace the transmission after 100,000 miles because I had the 4-cylinder version. I know the 6-cylinder version from reading on the message boards, those transmissions were different. They lasted a lot longer, potentially a couple 100,000 miles. So repairs varied too much to include in this exercise. But I will dive right in here, and I'm going to be very brief on the video version of this. I'm just going to show you the slides and maybe make a quick comment on it. But if you check out my blog post, you'll see each of the slides and you can look at the specific line items in more detail there. But I'm just going to basically scan the slides here for you. So speeding ahead to the dollar per mile comparison here, we see that the Civic might intuitively make sense. It's more expensive to buy new, but it decreases kind of as you expect in cost per mile all the way out to the farthest extreme. But then you see as we move up the food chain, so to speak, to the CRV, those values hold better. And it actually is about the same cost to buy a new for 3 years and sell it after 3 years as it would be for 7. So for that CRV, looking at this information, I might make the decision to, hey, I'll just sell that CRV after 3 years because I know it's going to cost me the same as if I were to hold it onto it. Why not upgrade to a newer version for the same price? You also see the differences in how cars depreciate over time. The minivan and the Mustang in this example here, quickly reaching kind of an equilibrium. It's interesting that, to buy a 3-year-old Mustang and a 3-year-old minivan overall is about the same cost per mile based on these assumptions. I did, with the Jeep is a little bit of an outlier in that this particular model, the JL that just came out in 2018, it's only 3 years old. The 2018s were probably in a limited supply. So that could be one of the reasons why it's actually cheaper to buy that new as opposed to buy used. But in general, it's roughly comparable to buy a 3-year-old Wrangler as it would be a new Wrangler and own them both for 7 years. The Tacoma as well, one of the best, the vehicles that depreciate the least. I'll show you another way to look at this graph just in terms of, or this chart in terms of a dollar amount. just over a set period of time, just to give you a sense of comparison of how much money is at stake here. And when you're thinking used, the lowest end on this spectrum, if you're buying the oldest cars, I mean, it could potentially save you 50 to 100% compared to buying a 3-year-old version. So there's value to be had by continuing to hold out, which is intuitive, but just wanted to present this here so you can see how this actually shakes out. Again, check out the blog post, the companion post to this video if you want to see and take more time to look at these numbers more closely. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please take the time to like the video, comment if you can. If you want to see me cover comparisons of something like luxury cars or something else, if I see enough feedback, I'll make a video of that as well. So thanks again for watching, and tune in for the next video. Thanks.